Can we now please have, in opening opposition, WDUD? Thank you, WDU. Next, in closing government, can we please have UCTGSA?
It's a magnet. Stick it on your thing or your shirt. Bang, it's in. Cool?
I'm just going to allow my
If you
panelists
need
to
help,
quickly
just raise your hand, I'll come get you. Cool.
Starting on my father's left side.
Hi guys, this is the mic we're using.
Hi,
Okay.
everyone.
You're gonna grab, it's a magnet, see like this, and you're gonna take it over here and just like strap it in like that. If you need help, raise your hand, I'll come help you. It should work, yeah. If not, I'll give you my thing. Sean, do you know how to use the mic? Yes. Okay. This is the mic, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take it and you're gonna clip it on like that. If you don't have something like that, I could give you my tag and you can use this. If you're having any trouble though when you're clipping it on, just raise your hand, I'll come help you. That'd be great, thanks.
That is the entire reason we're here. All right. Speakers by now hopefully know all BP rules apply. 7-minute speeches, protected time before the first minute and after the 6th minute.
send. I'm actually just going to put that Awesome, you're good.
Since the mic on at the bottom of it,
On
like
the
this.
bottom, okay. Info slide. Panel, please, are we ready? All right. So I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two important clarities. One, this is an actor motion, which means we believe that we are arguing in the best interest of this average 20-year-old African. But secondly, we think today's debate is not so much so based on the pragmatics of what the Waka-Trix would look like inherently. A number of reasons why. Because ultimately, it's a new world with social, natural, and political imperfections that we inherently cannot predict. It could be better than this world, which is likely to be true, based on characterization I'll give you. It could also be worse, something we concede to. What it inherently means is that today's debate is about the opportunity, the principles and the idea of the opportunity to overturn the greatest anomaly that has ever happened to the African state, that has further self-determined every trajectory of your life, from the culture in terms of the language you speak with your parents, in terms of the things that you think about are important and the way you dress, to the way you access education, to the things you believe are achievable for you inherently. What is the nature of a 20-year-old? We think in the status quo, 20-year-olds are some of the people who are the most socially aware of conversations that happen in today's debate. That's to say things about colonialism, slavery, etc. You're well versed in it. Also, you recently became an autonomous consenting adult. What it means is that you are significantly in a position where taking decisions into your own hands and being able to make big decisions to determine the trajectory of your life is something that's important to you. Thirdly, you're likely very adventurous and willing to take a lot of risks or more risk inherently because you believe you have more time to explore in this world, and inherently succumbing to the Waka-Trix means that you are going to even start your life again and gain new opportunities. But thirdly, we think that the pursuit and formation of identity is something that is very important to people in these years, because for the first 18 years of your life, you've lived subject to a different identity, largely determined from your parents and people in society because you were not consenting, which means establishing your own identity and the pursuit of it is inherently important to you. What then is the nature of the average African? One, you're probably talking about someone who comes from the average economic background, average ethnicity, average gender as well too. Like we don't think today's debate should be based on necessarily saying you are a minority in another space or not inherently. But it also means that you've been exposed to a lot of conversations about colonialism inherently because of how rampant it is. From schools, from your basic education, to your high schools, to your social media conversations, to your conversations with your friend inherently, to all the activists, because it is largely tied to all the conversations of reparations that you are told you are entitled to, for instance, from the oppressors, etc., in today's debate. Finally, we also think you are largely exposed to some of the traumas and harms that happen within Africa as well too. Even if you don't feel it as the average person, you consistently see people who are going through things like genocides, who are constantly disenfranchised, barely able to afford food, etc. that happens, and the economic disparities that exist. What then does the Waka-Trix look like? We think the Waka-Trix fundamentally works like the real world inherently. What that means is going into the Waka-Trix inherently is a new situation where you don't have any memories of your past. So you're not going to feel things like missing your parents, you're not going to feel like, oh, you're so scared of fear, etc. We think this is inherently important. It functions like its own world. What is the likely thing that happens before you go? You probably say goodbye to your parents. You're able to talk to them, have your last conversations. You probably have the best time of your life. Like you do the last things you could ever do and afford to do in this life because you're going to take a new opportunity as well. I don't think there's a lot that you inherently miss out as well too at the end of the day. But when you go into the Waka-Trix, what then happens? Which is very important. But I'll take your clarity because you've been...
Is the average 20 cynical of the reality in which they exist.
Oh no, they are not cynical. They just really want to discover their own identity and they want to change something that has influenced it beyond measure. Since everybody in their life has told them that this thing has determined your trajectory from the past up till now, they think they're entitled to make those changes into it. One, what then does the Waka-Trix look like? So obviously it's a world where a lot of the issues of transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, etc. didn't exist. We think it's a world where it's not that we didn't have globalization. We probably interacted with white men, the Danish, etc. that came, but they didn't colonize us. We probably traded friendly with them. Like we had some form of agreeable trade where we gave them things, they gave us things. We got technology from them, they got gold and things from us inherently too. And also we continue to develop. We know Africa wasn't perfect beforehand, but I think the West and other places weren't perfect beforehand. It's likely to assume that we would have also developed in some capacity there too as well. When you're born there, you're probably of the average race, ethnicity, etc. So we don't think conversations of being a minority there is the biggest issue. But the most important thing about the characterization of the Waka-Trix is that we don't know what happens there inherently, and that is what we want to find out most as a 20-year-old. What is the nature of colonialism? It was a world where our people were exploited, our people were killed, they were stolen, and our cultures were erased inherently. They were tied. Post-colonialism, our economies were even tied to the central banks of these other places. So you had places like, for instance, Mali, etc., and other people who used the CFA franc, having their capacity to have economic self-determination tied to France, etc., because they had to save parts of their money in those places, etc., too as well, which limited their capacity to self-determine. It also divided people among tribal lines. For instance, when the Houthis thought the Tutsis were in bed with the Belgians, because the Belgians largely educated them and largely for things like the Rwandan genocide, etc., changes in language too as well. We think that before, yes, finally, but why colonialism as compared to all other tragedies that have inherently existed in the African space? We think nothing has so much changed the course of history and your basic culture and basic self-determination, etc., of your states, of your countries, like colonialism inherently. And that is why it's the biggest thing we want to remove. What then are the principal justifications to do this? One, a world of true self-determination. We think the harms of colonialism inherently put the state you live in a situation where its capacity to self-determine from the start was largely limited, and capacity to self-determine now into the future is forever tied to these other actors and people, which means that your capacity to self-determine is also tied to these other actors that were largely problematic in nature and still are now. We think you are entitled as an autonomous being who wants to pursue some form of self-determination to do this. But secondly, identity forming, and why this is good. We think individuals are allowed to form their own identities, but part of forming identity usually is the pursuit of removal of tragedy and suffering from your identity. We don't think suffering is an inherent part of tragedy that people like. You usually try to overcome it. This is a unique capacity and option where you can be able to overcome that inherently. But it also means that you create your own identity that you believe is more true and more nuanced from your birthplace inherently, and not something that is forced on you from others. But three, the anxiety to know. Because I've characterized to you how you are in a world where you're constantly told that this is the way that the world should be, or this is how things have happened because of colonialism. People use it as an excuse to not give you some of your rights and your benefits, etc., and to effectively oppress you. We think you're entitled to at least know because it's something that you question on your mind as you go through those oppressions, as you go through those struggles, but most importantly, the principles of choice. You finally get to choose where you are born. We think for people who have suffered from the lottery of birth, every individual is entitled to that opportunity. So proud to win from OG. The choice thing, I knew you could run it, that's why I didn't run it.
All right, we thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Before we call on the next speaker, please can I remind the floor to be as quiet as possible. Please have the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Am I audible? No? Oh. Cool. All right. before I start, I just want to thank my little brother for all the photos he's been taking. And then I'd like to thank everyone in WDU who's been here to support me this whole time. Thanks a lot. And I'd like to thank my debating partner next. Cool. All right. Are you guys ready? I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Oh wait, no, sorry. Are you ready? I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The lack of passion in that last speech was subject not to them just like understanding the average 20-year-old African, but obviously it was the inverse. As the average 20-year-old African, you're passionate. You're passionate about who you are. You're passionate about your future. You're passionate about your family. You're passionate about what made you who you were in spite of the conditions that created you, right? Importantly, the reason why opening government is losing this debate is 3 main things. Number 1, they tell us that they want to maximize choice, but they want you to lose your identity. Importantly, in order for you to make a choice, you need to know who you are. On their side of the house, they say that you're going to absolutely lose your identity, go into this new world, the Waka-Trix or whatever, and then you're going to absolutely forget everything, and you're going to somehow make decisions. You're going to be born in some arbitrary place, with some arbitrary identity, with some arbitrary family, and you're going to have the same levels of choice. Nothing will be different. What will be different, though, is that you will no longer be African. And that's the second thing, is that on their side of the house, what's important and misleading is that the motion says that you lose your physical body, but in reality, the thing that you lose is your identity. You lose what makes you African, and that's what's so important and why they will lose this debate. Number 2, they tell us that eliminating colonialism is something that's good. Recognize, on their side of the house, you don't eliminate colonialism for everybody. You just eliminate it for yourself. You say that, listen, I don't care about all the Africans that are left behind. I don't care about my mother. I don't care about my father. I don't care about everybody who goes to any other university or institution in the country, or I don't care about any other African. That's their side of the house. They don't care about progressing colonialism. They care about protecting themselves. But importantly, they don't even do that because they lose their identity. Cool, I'm going to get on to my positive matter now. What makes the average 20-year-old African? They're informed about their colonial past. That is, their identity is formed by that, right? The struggles they've gone through, not just them, but their family, and that they've never given up on it. That's something that's important. They've gone 20 years being an African, and they aren't dead yet. Why would they just give up and sacrifice that? But secondly, and over and above that, the youth, specifically the African youth, are often optimistic, right? Let's look at how the youth look today, right? It looks like large amounts of student protests, VIT student protests for fees, student protests in Madagascar, student protests in Kenya. Their side of the house wants us to believe that the average 20-year-old African who's taking to the streets to make their society a better place is going to somehow abandon it. The second thing that's important here in regard to this is that they tell us that young Africans, specifically the young 20-year-old, would want to give up on their families, on everything that's proximate to them. We just don't understand why that's the case. Cool. 3 arguments then that you're going to get from us. First, you're going to get why this approximates moral suicide, and we're going to borrow from Nozick again. But secondly, we're going to get why this is abandoning other Africans. But thirdly, what you're going to get from us is why the average African is optimistic and wants justice. Cool. Argument number 1 on why this is moral suicide. Importantly, we think that for the average African, it would be wrong for you to do to yourself by stealth what would be wrong for it to be done to you by force. That's to say that when colonialism came into Africa and started to attempt to strip people of their dignity and of their identity, the reason why we don't value it, even if it made us a better place because it gave us roads or trains or whatever, is because they robbed us of our dignity, of what made us Africans and our choice to self-determine. The reason why that's so fundamentally important is because in the instance where you tell this young African is offered this decision, it's totally incommensurable that they would make the decision to give up on that identity. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, because they're proud of their culture. But number 2, because they're proud of the prospect of a greater future, right? The average African, like I said earlier in my context, is literally trying to make a better Africa, but also that they're not hopeless. The conditions of Africa are actively improving. We have the greatest amount of population growth ever, but secondly, we've got a lot of literally economic growth. Africa is not some hopeless state, it's getting to a better place, and the youth are pushing it there. The average 20-year-old knows this. But thirdly and importantly, the average 20-year-old has more opportunities than they've ever had before, and specifically in Africa. And the reason that's so important is because they're living in a better world than ever. Second argument then on how they wouldn't want to abandon other Africans. Importantly, other Africans exist in their lives. Their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters. They wouldn't want to go into this random world. They tell us they're going to sit down with their family and say they're going, and then it's going to be kumbaya. But literally, leaving your family, this is the thing that's most proximate to Africans. This is what makes them not just who they are, but what makes them wake up in the morning oftentimes. When you say hello to your mom for the first time in the morning, when they make you breakfast, when you say hello to your fathers and your brothers. Africans specifically live in really dense communities on the comparative with other communities. If you look at the West, right, they kick their children out like at the age of 20. Africa specifically, you have people living with their families and their communities and entrenched in them and serving in them. That's important. But secondly, and over and above that, they don't just care about the most proximate communities, I'll take you later, they care about generally the African community. That's why they're taking to the streets. The GBV movement in South Africa, particularly at Wits and all over the country, rose in the way that it did because the youth wanted gender-based violence to go down, because the youth believed that they could make the world a better place. On their side, the youth has to believe that you can't improve the world in order for you to go into the Waka-Trix, because you think, listen, I can't make the world a better place for African women. I can't make the world a better place for African men. So I might as well just choose myself and fuck everybody else. That's why they're losing this debate. But before I get on to my next argument, I'll take closing.
So, does it not matter if they like it more in the Waka-Trix?
How would you know if they like it more? And this is something that's important. I told you that it is moral suicide. That is, that when you enter the Waka-Trix, you can't evaluate whether you like it more because you are no longer you. You are no longer African. You are no longer Cheyenne. You are no longer Nikita. You are no longer Sino. You lose your identity as an African and as a human being when you enter the Waka-Trix. So you have nothing to evaluate whether it's better or worse. Third argument then, the second thing that's important then is why this is important. Cool. It's that unlike other nationalities, Africans care about making the world a better place. They care about things like Ubuntu, specifically 20-year-old Africans. They care about making the world a better place. Third argument on optimism and justice. We think that the youth are not only optimistic about the future, but the youth are not done with the fight. Specifically, the youth are young enough to say that we demand equality, that we demand that the West pay the reparations that they owe us. And when they enter the Waka-Trix, they give up on the opportunity to hold those people accountable for what they have done to us. And as an African, I don't think that that's something that you would do, specifically a 20-year-old African. And that's why we would protest for things like Palestine in other parts of the world to help the oppressed. We care about the world and we care about Africanity. We are Africans.
But you watch countdown. Right. You deserve a life where you aren't shaped and socialized by the evils of the world. We can't fiat no evil in our world, but we can fiat the removal of the greatest evil known to man that permeates through the veins of Africa and corrupts her social, economic, and fundamental existence and hurts us all, especially as the average 20-year-old African person. We are going to prove to you conclusively why in status quo Africa has been significantly hurt by colonialism and how our war significantly makes us at least better capable of getting the ability to get change in of itself. Number of things you think should be done in today's debate. How about this Africa? I think colonialism has fucked us up. And there are many examples of this. Number one, coup d'etats. Coup d'etats, even today, I read the news and there's a coup d'etat about to happen in Benin. There are things like NSAS in Nigeria, where they are constantly hurting the citizens, where they are constantly hurting the average youth, like me and you who are 20 years old. We have more things like how we have learned helplessness, how people are constantly seeing that on a day-to-day basis, they are not capable of getting food to eat, etc., etc. We think these things are really important because at any point in time, a vast majority of the ills which exist within status quo are things you can directly tie to the fact that we're under a colonial past in of itself. But second thing we think in today's debate, which is really important, is the conversation about whether, if not at all, there's a certain level of passion, whether passion means hope, not a logical inconsistency in their case. They say, oh, there's so much hope. That is why everyone is going on protest. That's why everyone is fighting on the day-to-day basis. Think about it logically. If everyone is fighting every single day, that means that the world is bad. It means that at any point in time, we realize that there are so many things ill with our world and we need to create change. But I think it's really important for a secondary reason. Today's debate is fundamentally an actor motion. What that means is that you have to come and prove to us that this singular individual thinks that the whole of society's existence is something that they must carry on their back and live with in order to create change of itself. We think that doesn't exist in their side in today's debate. But 5 reasons why in today's debate, the average African is probably cynical. Number one, we think that there's a significant lack of resources which exist in Africa due to the fact that at any point in time, colonialism happened and drained us of resources. Number two, the average African can probably see the dependence which exists on the West and the disparity of resources and wealth which exists in status quo. Number three, we think that they are probably lower income and aren't making a lot of money. Their lifestyle isn't necessarily good. Number four, we think that they probably know that by the next 5 years, they're probably working a 9 to 5 with no escape until they're 60. They're probably going to live a meaningful life, meaningless life of itself. But number five, we think that at any point in time, they realize that they can't climb up the social ladder. Number one, I did not choose where I was born. Number two, I did not choose the things which exist in status quo. Number three, I did not choose the capacity for me to live a meaningful life of itself. We think that therefore, it is important that as a 20-year-old person, I take this choice because in a world which has significant amount of evil and so many things have gone bad, if nothing at all, I have gotten the chance which I wouldn't have had in status quo. I think that the point where you've been given the chance, in a world where human beings aren't given the chance, you must take this chance in of itself because it gives you a significantly better life. But number two, prove that we are capable of getting a better life. At the point where I analyze to you that so many of the evils within society are directly tied to the fact that colonization happened, i.e. the division around borders which don't actually work for us. For example, Biafra, Nigeria, and all these things which happen, I can prove to you conclusively that there's a better likelihood of us living a meaningful life. But number two, all the resource draining which made us incapable of like globalizing properly or developing properly are things which probably doesn't happen. Which means Africa is probably more developed in this digital world. It means that we are better capable of getting access to the things we want. It means our more proximate self-actualization of it in today's debate. We are still comparatively better. But that thing we do today's debate which is really important. Simple harms principle. We think that at the point where you are taking an action which might fundamentally harm you, it is wrong to take it. Why is there harm in this world? We've lived for 20 years. We see the harms and evil within this world. We see that these things are significantly dangerous. At the point where we have a capacity to take into it, to get. You see, that's the point. I cannot fear to you that there won't be ills in that world. There will probably be the patriarchy too. There will probably be some form of sexism which exists in these places. But the point is, for the average African, the thing which has hurt us the most, the thing which has led to Islamist militants, the things which has led to all the harms which exist in this society, the divisions around racial lines, the fact that there's racism, the apartheid happened, the fact that at any point in time, if I leave this place and I go, someone will look at my skin color and tell me I can't be a billionaire just because I'm a black man. The fact that so many of these things are directly tied to racism is the fact that, if not at all, I enter a world where a vast majority of these things are removed. We think, if not at all, it makes us better capable of living life in itself. But something we think is really important and should consider within today's debate is that we don't want any conversation on the upbench about how it removes the identity of who we are. Because we think that fundamentally that is victim blaming of itself. Think of this pragmatically. When I go through something extremely traumatic and I go to a therapist, I'm going to the therapist to make sure that traumatic experience doesn't constantly define me, because it makes it better for me to be capable of living a meaningful life and to actually be capable of self-actualization of itself. Meaning that at any point in time, as African people who are constantly be disenfranchised, who have gone through collective trauma, who have been hurt so bad by society, it is really important that we get a framework which removes these things from us and makes us better capable of reaching self-actualization. Why is all the argumentation around really important to today's debate? Simple thing is a simple actor motion. I really want you to get this. I'll slow down for you. It means that at any point in time, what is most important is what makes the actor happier. We think that for the average human being, what matters to them the most is the ability to, number one, live a full life, and number two, self-actualize. Yet again, I cannot fear to you in today's debate that they don't go through sexism, they don't go through the patriarchy, etc. But what I can't fear to you in today's debate is that we remove the one singular thing which has imprinted on your skin and made it so that if you go to wealth, you're less likely to win wealth, which has made it so that if you actually try to become a billionaire, you're less likely to reach these places and become a billionaire, which has made it so that at any point in time, as the average African, you are going to be left to Islamist militants in the north, you are going to be left to the cool belt, you are going to be left to desertification, you are going to be left to a lack of resources, and even if you live in your own country, you are going to be left to a world where you don't get the resources you need. If nothing at all, I'll prove to you conclusively that on an actor level, I give you choice, I analyze harm calculus to you, and most importantly, I prove to you a world we are most proximate to the keys which matter to you. We are winning from OG, W's in the fucking charts.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Once again, can I please call the House into order? Can everybody please quieten down?
Could you just hold that out for me?
Who's this? Yeah. All right. For my dedication, I fear it's very similar to Cheyenne's. It's firstly to my sister who's coming to watch me for the first time ever speak. It's to WDU for being a great union. And Cheyenne for being a brilliant debate partner. Alrighty. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. The most important thing in this debate is twofold. It is not only that the actor lives a fulfilling life, it is that the actor would do something that is in their interest and that they fundamentally want to do. Firstly, on living a fulfilling life, the vast majority of Africans are still able to live this fulfilling life within the world they're in. But it's also the life that they've started, and likely the one that they want to be able to finish. At 20, you've barely touched the scrap of being a person and being who you want to be. We think it's incredibly disingenuous to say that they're going to abandon this life altogether, or that is something that they would want. I'm going to start off with some points of rebuttal against what we get from OG. The first thing that they tell us is that they want to be able to pursue an identity outside of all these things that have already defined them, because they've lived for 20 years already. This cannot possibly be true if the world that they've lived in and the one that has informed the identity that they have is one that is fundamentally within this society. You cannot create the same extension of that identity and pursue something following that identity if you're abandoning it as a total. At best, you're able to pursue a new identity, something we think they're unlikely to want because they're likely still wanting to continue what they have started. The second thing they tell you is that you're likely going to want to get away from post-colonial trauma as much as you can. Except the problem with this chat is that for the most part, these traumas have informed who we are as a society and as Africa. The point of this is that fundamentally the nation or the continent of Africa right now is very informed by its colonial past. To be able to exist as it is, to be able to continue the culture that it is, it must continue to perpetuate that same culture to a degree. It must continue to want to fight against that. This is not something you can strip away. You cannot ignore your traumas. You can only try and hope to make them better. it does not solve them to stop them entirely. The next thing that they tell us is that you're likely going to want this world more and you're likely going to like it more because it's a better African society. There are two problems with this. The first one is that we don't know if this is a better society, but regardless of whether it's a better society, we don't think you want to go in it, because the pursuit of this better society means to abandon the one that you're in. Why do we think the average 20-year-old African is unlikely to do this? Because the average 20-year-old African is sitting in this room right now, and they continue to sit in this room, despite the fact that there are several other places that could be easier for them to be. There are several other places that aren't as hard as a debate championship, and they continue to be here because they want to be fighting for something that they believe in the very first place. We don't think it's ingenuous to say that just because something is an easier life is something that they would want to choose in the first place. The last thing that they then tell us is this principle of choice. The problem with their principle of choice is that you still have the choice. We just think that you wouldn't want to make the choice. You're allowed to make it, I just wouldn't. There's a very big difference between these two things. And the reason that you don't want to make it are tenfold. They're the reasons that Cheyenne has already given you. That the community that you're built is something that is already going to exist. But that the African individual is incredibly unlikely to want to break free of this in the first place because African nations in almost totality push a rhetoric of wanting to be community-based, of being something that supports the people around you. This means it's incredibly unlikely that you do not have one singular person that you want to or are willing to stay here for, because you're not making this choice to go with your society. It means you're leaving everything and everyone you know behind, and you have to fundamentally prove on the governmental side that they don't care enough about these people to want to stay and exist within the same world as them. The second thing that Cheyenne then tells you is that the average African is incredibly hopeful. Why do we think the average young, youthful African is incredibly hopeful? Because we see an increase of social movements. We see an increase in people wanting to create a better future. When you want to create a better future, it's unlikely that you're going to abandon the pursuit that you've likely already started because you think it is something worth fighting for and because you don't want to abandon the people around you to a worse life. But cool, let's get on to my extension if my book doesn't fall. There are two reasons that I'm going to extend this debate on. The first one is the average young 20-year-old in general is very they're very nervous about the age of the digital AI. Why? Because we know how dangerous it is. It's why you see, particularly for young people, pushbacks against things like AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends, because we don't want to live in a fake world. Because we fundamentally value the reality that we live in, regardless of how bad it is, because it is real. This house would always choose the red pill. The problem with this is then that these individuals are unlikely ever going to want to join it, regardless of whether they would like that society better. Once they're in it, they're incentivized to stray away from it. The second thing is irreversibility. The average young person at 20 years old doesn't like making irreversible life decisions. Most 20-year-olds don't like that they have to choose a degree they have to study for their whole lives. You're still able to change this. The average 20-year-old is incredibly unlikely to want to sign away everything and everyone they know and have no ability to ever get that back whatsoever in the pursuit of maybe having this better life, because it is something that we think is incredibly dangerous and incredibly risky, and that they're unlikely wanting to sign away in totality. I'll take you, Siamo.
Why do Africans get on boats in the Mediterranean in the journey to Europe?
We think the vast majority of Africans haven't. Why do we think the majority of the average 20-year-olds haven't? Because it is always going to be a minority of people who are leaving. We are not saying that there aren't people who are willing to leave. We're saying that the majority don't want this. But twofold, we think that there is a difference between getting on a boat where you're still able to communicate with your family, where there is still a degree of reversibility in being able to come back and never being able to remember a life at all, or to even acknowledge that you've had a past. Cool. Why do we think in totality we win this debate? There's 4 metrics that I want you guys to pay attention to. 1, irreversibility. You can never undo this, you can never go back, you can never even remember the life that you have. This is something the average 20-year-old is unlikely to ever want. But 2, you're likely going to have to give away all and every family or relationship that you have, and it is incredibly disingenuous to say African individuals specifically do not have a singular person they are willing to stay in this world for. The third thing is the ties to their culture. There's a culture and identity ties that come with the world we live in, regardless of whether it's whether it's bad or not. We still think it's a world worth living in, a world worth fighting for. It's why we don't see people continuously just committing suicide because of this on mass scale every single day. But lastly, we think there is a fundamental one for justice and reparations that come beyond wanting to have an easier life. It's coming towards wanting to make better of the life that you have. We think, in like truth, this debate goes to 0-0. Victory is inevitable.
We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. And now brings it close to the opening half of the debate. We'd now like to call upon the member of
The African today is entrapped in the struggle of becoming. The identity of the African youth is a search, a restless movement, a migration outward, migration inward, and migration away. In the past, we were caught on ships in the Atlantic. Today, we are caught on ships in the Mediterranean. Whether physically, spiritually, or in a relation of becoming, the African youth today aspires to move. We think the Waka-Trix is the best destination. Responses to 0-0 integrated. What I'm about to deliver is a dense but hopefully followable extension from our opening rooted in African philosophy. Let us start with what currently affixes the African today. It is a forced identity multiplication. A few reasons for this. The first is there is an inachievability of our aspirations that forces us to therefore split our identities between how we live and how we want to live, our aspirations. The second is because there's unexplainable and arbitrary violence, which is cyclical and self-justifying in forms that we cannot even understand. And so we must also split ourselves between the person who lives in peace and the real person who is encountered by violence. But third, there is a domination of a contextual identity, the fact that we even speak in English, we wear clothes like this. We cannot understand the identities that are real to us because we don't know what it even means to be African in a world where we are forced to perform non-Africanness, and so our identities are therefore split. Second argument, not yet, is that Africa has inevitable parallelism because we are a post-colony. What does this mean? Number one, it means that our governments aren't the ones that dictate how we live our lives. Our lives are dictated by paramilitaries, by police officers that randomly charge us taxes on the side of the roads, by arbitrary allocation of power to people who are not democratically elected but are able to exercise gang violence over us. And this parallelism means that our own survival requires establishing our own form of parallel life. And so we must have the identity we perform in private, maybe we don't like our government, and the identity we perform in public, like ululating for our leaders, which is why one day Africans protest against dictators, and the next day they lay out carpets and bow down before them because our identities are in flux and in conflict with each other. This is the problem with African youth today. Not yet. Next, there is a separation between reality and our aspirations. Let's get into some African philosophers here. The first is John Mbiti, who argues that many Africans are afflicted by the concept of a life world, which is a separate realm alongside the world we live in today, where we venerate people who are living dead, what you may call ancestors. And the reason why Africans are particularly affixed to venerate ancestors is because they live outside of the realm of subjection that Africans experience, and they live in a realm where they are not separated by identity, which is why the aspiration for many Africans is to become an ancestor, because that is when we are finally actualized. Second philosopher, Sophie Olowole, argues that divination amongst the Yoruba people through Odu Ifa is a form in which we try and access divine knowledge inaccessible to us on earth today. Third philosopher, Muhobe Ramose, argues that being, which is Ubu, tends toward the particularity of its implementation, which is Untu, which is where the word Ubuntu comes from, where many Africans are attempting to become particular individuals and achieve identity. But the African is stuck between this movement between general being, in other words, just being seen as a regular African average person, and actually emerging as individuals. And so our identity becomes a struggle between the two. Next philosopher, Frantz Fanon, argues that the African lives within a state of dizziness as a result of our experience of colonial subjection, something which is called vertigo. And this period of vertigo means we cannot understand ourselves, we cannot understand others, and so we lose through life being eternally dizzy. Final philosopher, Siamo Malachi, argues that movement and migration are attempts that we make to escape the post-colony. There's a reason people are on ships on the Mediterranean, is because they are trying to leave something they cannot escape from. Not the physical location of Africa, but the subjection of their identity. The POI.
Speaker, the one thing tying all those philosophers together is that they were African. Are you saying that they just don't know what it was to be African? That you are at 20 years old just didn't know what it was? We accept it's complicated, but you loved it.
Before my speech ends, you'll understand why we don't need to be African. The word African wasn't even dictated or decided by us. It is an identity imposed upon us. It is a word through which doesn't even exist in any African language. We don't need to be Africans to have identity. We need to resolve the complexities of the negotiations between who we are and who we aspire to be. Africans don't want to be Africans. They're getting on ships. Okay, so why do we support the Waka-Trix in today's debate as the person that is migrating, me, the average African? And this is because this is the only means through which we can attain full emergence. So the life world I spoke about, just think of the Waka-Trix like that ancestral realm that young Africans are already aspiring to achieve. Secondly, we can then resolve the techniques of divination. Think of the Waka-Trix as that divine realm. Thirdly, we can resolve this issue of arbitrary and cyclical violence. Why? Because even if there's violence in our world, it's a different kind of violence. It's a foundational violence that we can resist. But cyclical violence comes before us and makes it much more difficult for us to resist it. Next, it creates an opportunity for us to form a singular cohesive identity. Regardless of what this world looks like, it is no longer a negotiation between reality and aspiration. It is just reality. And so we are no longer split in our personality. Bringing in another African philosopher, Impoche Vase argues that in order to be a unique and fully functional human being, we must have three properties. The first is that we must be a rare human being, unique. The second is that we must not be substitutable. And the third is that we must not be incomparable. So what is the problem for the average African today? We are none of the three. We are just an average African. We can be substituted for another young average African. We can be killed off in a mine and replaced by another average African in that mine. So we are never rare, we are always substitutable, and we are never incomparable. Therefore, in our Waka-Trix world, we may actually have the opportunity to achieve real becoming and being. Next, the alternatives are worse. Migrating to the West, obviously there's still the death, the violence, and the transfer of parallelism. Why not stay in Africa? Because Africa will continue to be maintained as a post-colony. Final philosopher, Ashin Mbembe argues that the infrastructure of violence which created Africa is prior to the attempts to challenge it, which is why states still implement the violence against us that colonies did. They killed Sankara, they killed Lumumba, they killed Biko. We shouldn't aspire to stay as Africans who will continue to be maintained in our subjection. Instead, we should no longer be metaphysically non-existent, and we should aspire not just to be, but also to become.
Do you think I went over this?
I think there were parts that were fun.
Huh?
I think there were parts
All
more
right,
fun,
we
that's more
thank
fun,
the member
exciting.
of government for that speech, and once again, can the floor please quieten down? It is incredibly difficult to hear the amazing speeches that we're getting. So, without further ado, can we please now have the member of opposition? Here, here.
Oh, it's foul.
Oh, shit. What's up? I just need to clip this on you.
Why is this here? What is this for? Oh, that, oh, okay. That makes sense now.
Hi everybody, once again, can we please quieten down? It is incredibly disrespectful to speak while the debaters are speaking. So please ensure that you are as quiet as possible.
All right, I'll be starting soon, but I'm just going to give a quick shout out. The first shout out goes to my union, WDU is actually especially, well, the members that are here, and especially the members that aren't here, the likes of Teddy, the likes of Matilda, the likes of CK. I think they've been the greatest support structure I've ever had, and I wish they were here right now. I think the next shout out goes to my lovely partner, Fumani. You really were so strong throughout this tournament. Yeah, partnering a crash out isn't easy, but she did it. The next, I think just a couple of people in the space, people like Haniel, who has really, really been supportive as well. People like some of the people on the panel, you guys have been true friends. Yes, but then the last one is probably a shout out to God. I will just say this really briefly. At Worlds, Tiamo practically described me as quite soulless in my approach to debating, and that is because at some point in time, this space became a very soul-sucking activity that brought me no joy. And I was so much encouragement had to happen for me to just exist in this space, and I'm here. And guys, I don't think any of you guys will actually ever be able to understand what a testament that is on a religious level. So this is just a shout out to the deity I believe in. Thank you so much, Yahweh, and I hope that this speech gives you all the honor and all the glory. Okay, now that I've done that, I guess, like cringe thing, since shout outs are a bit cringe, I'll be starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Panel, our case from closing opposition is simple. The uncertainty is not worth the gamble. And secondly, the loss of what you could potentially do as a young 20-year-old in Africa with the African identity is not worth any potential gain that you could attain in this Waka-Trix or whatever this is called. What does the average African 20-year-old care about? I think that they care about certainty, and I think that this is the greatest incentive or interest within the debate. Why is this so? I think by virtue of colonialism and the way in which the world functionally works, you have been robbed from your capacity to have certainty over your survival, certainty over your actualization, certainty about where you're going to end up tomorrow. I think that the existence of Africans has always been one of a fight for some sort of certainty. So when we are fighting against the oppressive systems that took away our autonomy and our control over our lives, the certainty has always been a great push. And when we continue to make those fights, we continue to do it because all we want at the end of the day is a certainty that we're going to be able to have control over our lives. That is why we go ahead and we protest against our government to make femicide a national disaster, so that we have a certainty that we're not going to be to face the violence at the hands of men with small egos and even smaller anyways. So how does the uncertainty practically exist in the Waka-Trix? Because this is something that the opening half practically concedes to. We do not know how bad this world could genuinely get. At a point in time, it is still susceptible to imperfections. I think in opening government, they already concede that things like patriarchy or other forms of systems could still exist. I think in this world, even if you don't have colonialism, you could still be riddled by huge and consistent tribal wars. You could be riddled with huge and consistent hurricanes. I think that there are imperfections that could actually really be bad. But why is this important? It's because you don't know if in this world you have the capacity for redress against these things. That is to say, even as vicious and as terrible as colonialism was, that viciousness and aggression has given us the incentive over time to push back against it and to continue to push back so that we don't have those systems continuing to oppress us. And we have those forms of redress and the capacity to go ahead and get that redress in the first place. That is why I can protest without being shot. Well, and if I get shot, there is going to be some sort of justice that happens. I don't think that in the Waka-Trix you genuinely have capacity to even reach that form of redress if you are genuinely suffering. And before I continue, what do you want to do?
So people in Sudan had their lives led to waste when the RSF occupied Al-Fasher. This world can also get significantly worse. I'm not quite sure why it's only our world that has to be worse.
The thing is, at least in our world, we have the capacity to have collective action so that when we want to go ahead and revolt against these things about the things that the UAE is funding through the genocide in South Sudan, we have some sort of capacity to change that. And that capacity is fueled by our certainty, the greatest incentive that we ought to protect within the debate. At a point in time that this is uncertain, we don't necessarily think that the gamble is worth it and that we should be choosing it as Africans. First of all, your ability to control your life plus your surroundings is something that is important for you to protect. Look, and it's not necessarily just because you have the capacity to change systems. I think that at a point in time, they have, there's genuine systems in order to give you some sort of opportunity. It is worth going ahead and using that. So that is to say, at a point in time, there are quotas within the University of Witwatersrand to ensure that I could get into the program that I am studying. I can still benefit that, and I don't think that and considering the fact that there were huge sacrifices that had to be made for that, I don't necessarily see why on the government comparative, that sacrifice is worth just giving up for a world in which, okay, sure, it might necessarily be better. Because here's the thing, at a point in time, the current world still gives me the capacity to go ahead and have control over my own life and access to a certainty that I genuinely care about, certainty about where I'm going to end up, certainty that I'm going to graduate next week, certainty that I'm definitely going to win this final. It's going to, that's a world where I don't necessarily think that I need to trade off at a point in time. It's proximate to my beliefs. What is the trade-off further, yeah, you have a bright and beautiful future. And why is that true? I think that the way in which the system practically exists now is that you genuinely have the capacity as an African child to meet this interest of certainty. You know, you have the West going ahead and funding scholarship programs so that you have the opportunity to actualize and get better through education. You have quotas to ensure that you can get out, and so on and so forth. Why are we comparatively better than our opening opposition? Because I think that when we talk about certainty, I think that is greater than the conversation about just leaving everything behind. Because at a point in time, you exist as an actor that is like that one certainty. That is why you grind every single night in order to get a degree. That is why you grind at your job in order to get money. Then you speak more to how we protect the greatest interests of Africans. What are a few responses to the opening government case? They go ahead and tell us that, first of all, you have to care about identity, and that the removal of suffering from identity is a greater identity. As a Congolese girlie who acknowledges the suffering that my people have to go ahead and exist in, I can co-opt that suffering and just be proud of it. I don't understand why the identity of suffering in and of itself is bad, but the comparative of having an identity that is arbitrary is better. The other thing that they tell us is that you have no capacity to self-determine. I think both of the op teams show you why in the current status quo that is untrue, because of the tools of redress that we had to fight for in order to get that capacity to self-determine increased. Like the white guilt got leveraged, and now I can get a scholarship to study at this institution. I think the other thing that they tell us is that the world is shit, especially if you live in Africa. Well, tough tits. Even if the world is shit, at a point in time, I can have the capacity to go ahead and fight against the system to protect the certainty of my own survival. I think that is better, and I think that I am proud to oppose.
Okay, I'll start with one of the shout-out things. First shout-out, obviously, to my debate partner, Tiamo, who in his madness and barefootedness has opened my mind and my world of debating. Second shout-out is to all the bros in the audience, Jimmy and Oisa, Bob, Wisdel, Zuki, Kumo, and everyone else that I am not forgetting, but I definitely love a lot. You guys make this space enjoyable. God knows lots of people are trying to make it unenjoyable. And the last shout out is to my niece, who will be turning a year old in 2 days. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Albert Camus encourages us to imagine Sisyphus happy because the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Closing opposition is right. There is no guarantee of the Waka-Trix being an absolutely better world, because the info slide does tell us that it is subject to natural, political, and social imperfections. This is therefore not a debate about choosing one world over another, but a debate about the migration between worlds in an effort to reconcile identity, which Tiamo proves is split, zero engagement from literally anyone in this entire debate. I'll start then with some responses to the opening opposition case. The strategic flaw here is that they romanticize and exceptionalize the African identity, which is three things foundationally flawed, therefore does not deserve this romanticization and exceptionalization. One, the African identity is no less arbitrary than any other identity. OG tells you lottery of birth and all such things. Secondly, and importantly, this identity is itself a violent imposition. There is not a single person in this room who has voluntarily opted into Africanacity, who has named themselves African, who has made themselves African. Note that it is within itself a Western construction. Thirdly, it is quite literally a bullseye on your back. The violence that Africans suffer is precisely because they are Africans. It is manufactured to be cyclical, to be predatory, and to be targeted at Africans. They therefore have to prove that despite this arbitrariness, despite the identity itself being a violent imposition, it is something that we ought to aspire to retain even when we have a choice to opt out of it. Direct responses here. First, Cheyenne tells you that when you opt into the Waka-Trix, you lose your identity because you have memory loss and you were born as a newborn baby. The harm here is symmetrical. Raise your hand if you weren't born as a newborn baby. Raise your hand if you were born with acute awareness of your Africanacity. There's no reason why this is especially harmful, or why it's more harmful when it happens in the Waka-Trix. The second thing that they tell you is that you essentially lose out on participating in elimination of colonization for everyone else, and you stop participating in the struggle. I think the framing of the average African in OO is deeply flawed. They seem to think Thomas Sankara, Steve Biko, Patrice Lumumba, all of these were average individuals. The fight for colonialism is not something that is headed or charged by the average African. It is something that is headed and charged by the exceptional African. They can't burden you sitting here in this room with emancipation. Then they tell you that the average 20-year-old African is A, informed about the past, B, passionate about changing society, proud of their culture, and there's so many more opportunities that they experience. Note that none of these qualities are inherent. None of these qualities are also special. Therefore, none of these qualities will cease to exist when you join the Waka-Trix. Why does passion disappear? Why do opportunities disappear? Why does hopefulness disappear? They aren't able to prove that these are qualities that are inherent to Africans existing in this society. But secondarily, the fact that there is protest action doesn't really mean that Africans are especially more hopeful than young people everywhere else. What of the youth of Nepal? We think they ought to contend with reality as it exists. Lastly, they tell you that the average young African won't make irreversible decisions. And I think that the worst thing about the OO case is a defense of identity while itself contending and struggling to reconcile with reality as it exists. Siamo tells you that the young African is constantly trapped in a migratory cycle. Therefore, these migrations are themselves irreversible decisions that people make every day. Ask Umar where he lives versus where he was born. We don't think they're able to fiat that. Let's move then into the closing opposition case. They tell you that the uncertainty is not worth the gamble. We ought stay in the reality that we know and can predict, because this reality gives us the tools to fight against it. Let's talk about the tools that Penal says enables us to achieve emancipation. One, we pursue justice in English. I am in this debate fighting for my life in English. Two, we pursue justice through Western institutions like the ICJ and the ICC. Ask anyone that was in the semi-final. The recourse that they're telling you about, the capacity to pursue emancipation, is also dictated by those from whom you seek emancipation. They aren't able to prove that Africans are able to independently actualize and emancipate outside of these structures. Then they tell you about the certainty of struggle. I think Boseo broke debate when he talked about self-defense being justified regardless of the loss, because these are the arguments we've been getting ever since. They ought to prove that there is something unique and inherent to the struggle that makes it worth pursuing every day, even in the presence of a choice. Sure.
Speaker, on your side of the house is the only side where there's inherent loss of identity. We can see that identity is complex on our side. We defend it because we won't let the Westerners win, because we love to be African.
This brings me very nicely into the extension from CG, which, note again, has gone entirely unresponded to. Let's chat about the way that identity exists for the average African today. Siamo tells you two things here. He tells you that the identity of the 20-year-old African exists in split or parallel universes. There's an inability to reconcile who we want to be, that is, who we aspire to be, the kind of just and equitable world that opening opposition tells you we fight for in protests every day, and who we actually are. This inability to reconcile these split identities results in massive waves of migration. We think that this is yet another form of migration that we think is justifiable, because migration becomes inherent then to the identity of the young African. This migration is a pursuit to reconcile the dissonance in identity, which is worsened by an inability to explain, understand, make sense of our world in the absence of the very institutions, people, organizations that oppress us and cause that dissonance. The only team that can win this debate is CG.
Quick one. I want to shout out my parents, even though they don't really understand why I like debating so much. So I'm glad that they always support me. I want to shout out Penel, she's always been here for me. I want to shout out my union. You guys make debating actually fun. And lastly, I'd like to give a very important shout out to every single person in this circuit that has actually made me believe in myself, despite what others have said, and that has led me to being confident enough to stand here. Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, each and every single average 20-year-old African in here that actually cares more about identifying yourself as an African before colonialism, I invite you to leave your STEM degrees and leave your law degrees and go learn Khoisan languages. This is the problem with the CG case. They don't prove the proximity of why the average 20-year-old fundamentally cares about all these philosophical ideas that they explain, right? We understand that Africans want to know who we were before colonialism. Note this information isn't inaccessible. The Khoisan are here. The people that lived before colonialism are here. We can tap into that knowledge right now. The reason we don't do that is because as average 20-year-olds, we are fighting for degrees because what we want is stability. What we want is to actually actualize in a world in which we are certain for a future that actually gives us freedom. With the problem with the CG case is they give us all these beautiful principles and these beautiful philosophical ideas about how Africans aren't able to actualize because they are constantly living in a parallelism or whatever, because you don't know who you are because you think in English. Cool. Why does the average African person care about this more than knowing what your future is going to look like? This is important characterization that Pernell gives you because note, none of you can prove that just because we don't go through colonialism, we aren't going through something that is equally as bad. Note, just because you don't go through colonialism, you can't prove that Africans are currently going through tribal wars. This means the OG case is weird because if they say that you want to identify and actualize because Africans are currently living in struggle, struggle is symmetric. It exists in this world that you're in. Your identity is always going to be contingent on your surroundings. You are always going to identify by the struggles that you are going to. You don't get rid of struggles on your side, which is why the impacts you want to claim aren't actually claimed definitively in your case. Cool. What do we tell you and why is it particularly important? We tell you that even if we don't want to hype up Africans as being so hopeful and passionate, we tell you that Africans want stability. Why is this important? The fact that this motion asks us to interrogate whether we're able to, as the average 20-year-old African, to trade off what we know, the world in which we are sure of, for a world in which we are unsure of, on the mere basis that colonialism hadn't happened in this world. This is the debate that had to happen. You had to engage the trade-offs and not promise something you cannot guarantee you have already lost. What we tell you is that the average African person wants to achieve stability and is more capacitated for the stability in real life. Because even if you aren't hopeful, even if you want to, even if you don't think that Africa is going somewhere great, you still are in more control of your future right now in real life than you are in control of the future in the digital world that government is trying to defend. That is to say, the capacity that Pernell speaks about isn't saying that we're having capacity for emancipation. We're saying we have capacity for emancipation, but we're also saying we have capacity for a future that can actually benefit you as the average 20-year-old. We don't think as a young person in Africa, you ought to trade off your future, trade off something you are in control of for something you aren't in control of and something you can't guarantee the benefits of. Try.
In your deliberation, you cannot be interventionist panel. The CG case on identity, pursuit of opportunity by migration is already established.
Oh wow, they're trying.
There's no way to show why they should supersede our cases. We win.
The point of that, I was just trying to show how they're derivative, fine, whatever. Cool. Why then do we rank better than our opening than our opening team, right? OO tells us a couple of things. Let me just get to it. Okay, cool. They basically tell us about passion and so on and so forth and whatever. We tell you that passion isn't guaranteed, right? Not every single average African person is passionate or has hope and whatever. But we say that even if it is, we don't define true self-actualization in struggle, because they have this weird case about saying that because you went through colonialism, this is what makes you African. We don't buy into that. We're saying that your Africanism exists in how much you're able to self-actualize and how much freedom you're able to gain as an average 20-year-old. We think this only exists in Pernell's speech. Why are we better than OG? We're better than OG, right? We're better than OG. That's the OG case. They're basically talking about identity. We don't think identity is contingent on surrounding. Why are we better than CG? We're more proximate to the interests of the average 20-year-old. We're more proximate to what the average 20-year-old tangibly wants to gain in their life. Why are we better than OO? We were better than OO because they constantly try and characterize the average African person as being a hopeful person. Their entire speech is contingent on the fact that African people want to emancipate themselves, want to do great things. We think if you're just an average Joe just living your life, you don't have to be contingent on their case to fall into Pernell's speech. Why is Pernell's speech important in terms of weighting? Pernell's speech is important because one, we tell you actually better than any other team here, what is most proximate to the average 20-year-old African? They are young, they are unsure, and they want to be self-actualized. We tell you self-actualization in the real world isn't impossible, right? Even if you're existing in this form of colonialism and so on and so forth, we tell you that self-actualization is possible. But two, we tell you that even if it isn't possible, it's more not possible on their side because you can exist in a world where you still have problems. You can exist in a world in which you still have issues, right? You can't guarantee that there won't be issues on their side. Cool. Okay, cool. That means then, what then should you deliberate on in terms of weighing? 3 things here. Who actually gains utility for the average African person? Who actually benefits the average African person? Who actually defines the interests of the average African person best and who actually does the work in like proving why these are approximate. Why is this only CO? It's CO because Penal provides to you proof as to why the average African person only cares about stability, the fact that you are studying your degrees, the fact that you want sure. But we also tell you that we don't need to guarantee anything on our side, right? What we are telling you is, for sure you know the world that you are living in, for sure you know the future that you are attaining, and the knowledge of this in and of itself is more valuable than any claim they want to prove on OG, because the uncertainty of it isn't worth the rest of your life as a young person in Africa. You are dying if you go into this virtual world. The fact that you are dying in and of itself means that you shouldn't do it, because you are young, you have a future, and you have capacity to access that future based on our side. It can only be CO.